Let's turn our attention to developments around freedom for religious schools. In New South Wales, this is a developing issue, becoming a state issue, and bipartisan support for freedom for religious schools could be trashed, following recommendations from an Albanese government-commissioned discussion paper. The Australian Law Reform Commission paper recommends forcing religious schools and universities to comply with the LGBTQ plus ideology. Well, Family First-backed independent candidate for New South Wales Upper House, Lyle Shelton, is joining us for his take on what's happening. Lyle, a special welcome back to 2020.
Yeah, thanks so much, Neil.
Lyle, you're saying religious schools, on behalf of parents, should be free to address staff and student behaviours which are against their sincerely held religious beliefs. We do take that for granted, but there's some threats to it.
Yeah, there is, Neil. We used to take freedom of religion and the freedom of religious schools, whether they be Christian or Muslim schools or Jewish schools, to teach according to their ethos and to require staff and students to be supporters of that ethos, because that's the ethos of the parent community. But an Australian Law Reform Commission discussion paper, which was released just last week, commissioned by the Albanese government's Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, recommends stripping schools of their right to hire staff who believe in their ethos, who are willing to live according to that ethos, and also to take away the freedom from schools to, for instance, ensure that children wear the uniform that is in accordance with their gender. So it's very much forcing an LGBTIQA plus ideology of gender fluidity upon religious schools. And that's where this discussion paper is taking the debate.
It also used to be the case, Lyle, that we'd take for granted that when there was a government in power, that an opposition party might take an alternative view. But it seems to be both sides are supporting this crackdown or this way to control religious schools and universities.
Well, certainly the Liberal Party at a federal level has been silent on this. Now the discussion paper has only just come out. But this debate about religious freedom and Christian schools has been going on for over 5 years, since the definition of marriage was changed in law. And unfortunately, instead of progressing towards greater freedoms, what the government is doing, with the silence, sadly, of the opposition, is further restricting religious freedom. So we're going in the wrong direction, and that's where this debate's taking us. And here in New South Wales, there had been some bipartisan support at a state level. Mark Latham, the One Nation Member of Parliament, had been instrumental in getting a religious freedom inquiry going. And at that inquiry last year, there was agreement from Labor and Liberal that religious schools should be free to hire staff who support their ethos and to ensure that the truth about gender and marriage could be taught freely in these schools. Now, it looks like the Albanese government is heading in the direction of overriding that bipartisan consensus here in New South Wales.
Lyle, we are used to the terminology that some use, and it seems to change in different contexts, a separation of church and state. Sometimes it's used the way people prefer it to be used in the context of what they're trying to argue. But there is a sense here in which if you don't have a separation of church and state, you have the risk of a state controlling the church. That's never good for a society, is it?
No, it's not. And, we all agree with the idea of separation of church and state, Christians and non-Christians alike, religious and non-religious people alike. But where the Albanese government seems to be taking the discussion through this Australian Law Reform Commission report that the Attorney General Mark Dreyfus commissioned, is to the place where the government decides what a religious community is and isn't. And the Law Reform Commission is essentially saying that a religious community doesn't have to have all the staff complying with the religion for that to be a religious community. Now, that's not for the government to decide. If a Christian or a Muslim school, wants to exercise its religious freedom and create an environment that supports the religion and the environment the children are educated in, then they should be allowed to require all staff, from the gardener through to the bus driver to the maths teacher, to be participants and advocates for that religion, not just those that hold positions of chaplaincy within the school. And that's what this report recommends. That's the direction that the Law Reform Commission is steering the debate. And my real fear is that there won't be political will to stand up for this once this report brings down its final recommendations in April of this year.
You're concerned that LGBTIQ political activists are actually being given here some preference, some special privileges under the law because they're dictating to the government what they think should be right and the government not listening to the church. Is that one way of framing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the government saying what it thinks is a religious community. It's not for the government to decide that. And the idea that an LGBT organisation would employ someone who openly supports what the Bible says about human relationships, marriage, sexual flourishing. No one expects an LGBT organisation like the Pride Centre in St Kilda in Melbourne to employ a Christian, and yet the LGBTIQ plus community, through its political activism, is gaining this acceptance that it's allowed to impose its views upon religious schools and dictate the sort of morality and the ideas about gender and relationships and marriage, that their ideas should trump those of the religious communities and those that the parents want for their children to be brought up in. And so that's just wrong for the government to do that. It's a double standard. It's wrong for the government to be involved in theology. We should have tolerance and diversity in our society, and there should be freedom for people to have their religion, to associate around that and their beliefs, and for other groups to give tolerance for that. But unfortunately, this political group wants to impose its view on everyone, whether they agree or not.
And Lyle, every little bit of political overreach that encroaches on religious freedom, and it seems to be adding up one upon the other. Now, where, in your understanding, have both sides of politics been on this issue of religious freedom? It seems to me they've been in support of it in the past.
Well, they keep saying they're in support of it. And ever since the 2017 marriage plebiscite, both Labor and Liberal said, yes, we're going to have religious freedom to make sure that there's no unintended consequences of the change to the marriage law. Now, we're over 5 years down the track, and there's been no religious discrimination bill. There's been nothing to protect the freedom of people who hold a different view on marriage to those of the political activists who caused the definition to change. And what we're seeing is more and more pressure being put on people of faith, and their schools, particularly Christian schools, are the canary in the coal mine here. And we're just seeing the latest attack through this Australian Law Reform Commission report saying, no, we don't think that Christian schools should be free to hire staff who support their ethos. We think, if there's a transgender student, they should be allowed to, a boy should be allowed to wear a girl's school uniform in defiance of what the school thinks about biology. So it's being imposed. There's no freedom here. The debate is going in the wrong direction, and there doesn't seem to be the political will from either Labor or Liberal to fight for freedom and diversity and tolerance over different views around marriage and gender. And we were promised this after the 2017 marriage campaign, but of course, 5 years down the track, it's going all the wrong way. And that's a real problem. And that's why Family First is in the fight, because if we see people like myself elected to the Parliament, we'll be bringing in private members' bills to provide for freedom of religion, and particularly for our Christian and other religious schools.
Now, our schools are in the crosshairs here. This is where the target is at what happens within the school context. We all might appreciate that what happens in the school context is just something on the sidelines for what happens in the church. So that's only a step away from where we're talking about government control. Let me ask you, though, you've read the Australian Law Reform Commission discussion paper. What sort of examples are they giving there that would make schools comply in a certain way that would be against their religious ethos?
Yeah, there's some really frightening examples. So, for instance, it's suggesting that if a school had a teacher who was in a non-spiritual role, and that teacher wanted to go to the Pride March, some of these Pride festivals, they have things like animal fetishes, all sorts of behaviours which would be totally against religion, Christianity and other religions, and against mainstream views. But if that particular religious school wanted to require that staff member to be someone who upholds an example that's in accordance with the religion, the Law Reform Commission is saying, no, that shouldn't be allowed. So that's one of the examples in this lengthy report. Other examples relate to uniforms. So the school couldn't enforce a uniform policy if boys wanted to wear girls' school uniforms and identify as someone of the opposite sex. So this is a real in-your-face attack on freedom of religion and an attack on basic biology and common sense as well. It's a real worry. And the fact that a report like this has even seen the light of day with its crazy recommendations, its anti-freedom recommendations, commissioned by the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, really shows what direction the government is taking this debate.
From what I can understand, also within those conditions would be the thought that a Christian teacher wouldn't be able to sign something that says homosexuality is a sin. Which might mean for some that would be a complete contradiction to a biblical teaching. Any thoughts there on how that could corner teachers and get people into all sorts of hot water?
Yeah, well, look, that's one of the specific examples in the report, which runs more than 50 odd pages. But that's an example that the Law Reform Commission gives, that if a statement of faith listed, certain behaviours which are in contravention to the Bible or the Quran, for that matter, that it would be against the law for the school to require staff members to sign a statement of faith in accordance with those particular moral beliefs. Now, that shouldn't be uncontroversial. For 2,000 years, Christianity has had a certain view about what it thinks is flourishing in the area of human sexuality, what it believes about marriage. Schools should be allowed to have statements of faith that people sign on to when they go to join an organisation. In fact, when the Ruddock Commission started this whole process of looking at religious freedom 5 years ago, they encouraged schools to put up front what they believe so that there's no confusion and no one could feel aggrieved if they'd gone and joined a religious school. But now the Law Reform Commission is saying, no, that's not good enough. You cannot even have a statement of faith in accordance with what your scriptures say about areas of morality or marriage, and that would then be against the law. That's what this discussion paper is saying. And look, I've been around government processes long enough to know when this finds its way into a discussion paper, that's a pretty good indication of where the government's taking the debate, unless there's going to be a massive pushback by the sector and by the community at large.
Well, the New South Wales state election is coming up at the end of March. It will be a critical turning point, especially for the state of New South Wales, changes that are happening in the upper house. The thought that there might be no Christian voice on a crossbench in the New South Wales upper house is for some something that sends shivers down their spine. And Lyle Shelton, you're standing as an independent candidate. You've got the backing of Family First Party, but the party itself is not able to stand candidates because of a registration with the Electoral Commission. But for people who are looking to support the initiatives that you're doing, we connect them to you through the Family First Party. Is that where they'll find information about the sorts of policies that you're standing for?
Yeah, that's right, Neil. The familyfirstparty.org.au website has all the information about my candidacy. As I say, the party's backing me. Because of the timeframes involved, we weren't able to be registered in time because we're reasonably new in getting the party re-established in New South Wales. But familyfirstparty.org.au has the information about my candidacy and the group that I'm leading for the New South Wales Upper House. And we'd certainly value your support and value the prayers of your listeners.
Well, so many will remember you spearheading the no vote back in that 2017 vote around marriage. Lots of people will want to see, Lyle Shelton, you achieve some goals with a political voice. So let me point listeners to familyfirstparty.org.au. You'll find out about the candidacy of Lyle Shelton on that website. Lyle, thanks so much for updating us on these critical issues today on 2020.
Thanks so much, Neil. It's been a pleasure.